to break the unions, and is the public on its side? Good evening. Senior doctors have broken ranks to urge their junior colleagues to restart talks with the government, criticising planned strikes as disproportionate. It's a script which might have been written by the Health Secretary himself. So by dividing the doctors, is the government hoping it can end up ruling them? On the railways too, ministers seem to be backing the bosses in their battle with the staff, even as the company at the heart of the dispute chalked up a £100 million profit. That angered the unions, but in these disputes, where does public support lie? Also tonight, Melania Trump sues the Daily Mail and an American blogger over allegations she used to work as an escort. Egregious, malicious and harmful, says Mrs. Trump's lawyer. We speak to the blogger. And Uzbekistan's president dies after nearly 3 decades in power. Having brutally crushed all dissent for so long, now there are fears his demise will leave a power vacuum.
And good evening from Stoke Mandeville, the spiritual home of the Paralympic movement, where in half an hour the heritage flame will be lit at the start of its journey to Rio for the opening of the Games on Wednesday night. Tonight, a special ceremony with disabled and non-disabled performers featuring Britain's Paralympic heroes is about to begin, and we will bring you it live.
Well, first it was the Prime Minister, medical leaders and the Patients Association rounding on junior doctors over their plans for 4 fresh rounds of industrial action. Now representatives of hospital trusts in England have formally called on the doctors to cancel the proposed series of 5-day strikes. Theresa May has accused the BMA of playing politics, but it isn't the only union she's taking on. Next week, the RMT will hold strikes once again on the beleaguered Southern Rail network. We'll have more on that in a moment. But first, with the latest on the doctors' dispute, here's our health and social care correspondent, Victoria MacDonald.
In the past week, 2 children's A&E units, one in Stafford and another in Greater Manchester, have closed because of staff shortages. And today, the head of one of the Royal Colleges told Channel 4 News that this, and not the junior doctors' strike, was the biggest threat to patient safety.
No doctor would contemplate strike action easily. But the junior doctors are drawing attention to the fact that their dispute seems to be just the tip of the iceberg of much, much more serious concerns about the way in which our health service is being organised, managed and delivered.
The British Medical Association has announced 5-day strikes for every month until the end of the year over the junior doctors' contract.
In just 10 days' time, there will once again be picket lines outside this hospital, as there will be outside trusts across England, unless there is a last-minute intervention. And certainly there are growing calls for that to happen, including for the Prime Minister herself to step in and stop these unprecedented strikes from going ahead.
We would like her to do what she did with Hinkley Point, for example, and take time to think about it, look at it in real detail and find out from patients and perhaps other members of staff in the health service what needs to be done.
Some members of the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges have described the industrial action as disproportionate, and the NHS Confederation and NHS providers representing all trusts in England have now formally asked the BMA to call off the strikes.
They're probably going to end up, if they go ahead, resulting in 500,000 lost operations and 4 million lost outpatient appointments. That's a huge concern, not just to NHS staff who have to try and run busy hospitals, but obviously to the patients concerned as well.
The Health Secretary wasn't answering questions this morning, but the BMA maintains the government must lift its imposition of the contract. And one junior doctor told us the strikes, though regrettable, were a sign of how strongly they feel.
I think we have to remember that this is about the junior doctor's contract being tied in with this proposal of a truly 7-day NHS, for which there is no funding, there is no plan, there is no staffing. We've just seen today, I read, a maternity unit in Oxford has been closed because there are no junior doctors to man it. This is the reality.
The new contract is due to come into force in October, with the first of the 5-day strikes to begin on September the 12th.
Victoria McDonald reporting. The chief executive of the Go-Ahead Group, which operates the troubled Southern Rail franchise, has insisted the firm doesn't make any money out of the line, despite booking annual profits of almost £100 million. Passengers have suffered months of delays and cancellations because of a dispute over changes to the role of conductors. Next week, to add to their misery, hundreds of thousands of commuters on Southern Rail will endure yet more strikes. So what do they make of it all? Paul McNamara has been finding out.
It's been a tough summer on Southern Rail, but today things are looking up. Well, for the owners at least. Yesterday, the government announced a £20 million fund to sort the problems on its network. Less than 24 hours later, the company that part owns the rail firm announced profits of nearly £100 million.
How much are they making?
£100 million.
Yeah, that's insane.
What was the service like this morning?
Pretty good, really.
Is it always like that?
No.
Well, it was 12 minutes late, so that counts as being on time. Pretty close. Yesterday was 35 minutes late, so 12 is almost 3 times as good, isn't it?
So this morning, the parent company announced profits of about £100 million.
OK, that's well done by them.
Happy about that?
Well, I like to see companies making a profit. I'd like to see them deliver a timely service as well as that. So I think the two should sort of be linked.
After months of delays and cancellations, in July Southern cancelled more than 300 daily services. And last month, union members walked out for 3 days in a row over removing conductors from trains.
So despite a summer of bad publicity and industrial action, the company that owns 65% of Southern Trains, the Go-Ahead Group, has still seen profits rise by 27% to £99.8 million. Unions say just a fraction of that is all that's needed to keep conductors on trains, to end any future strikes, and most importantly, make life just a little bit better for commuters.
And for those unions, the £20 million fund from government is beyond believable.
Well, you couldn't make it up, can you? One day, the government give them £20 million to improve services. The next day, they announce £100 million worth of profits. Wouldn't you have thought one person would have said, well, if you've got £100 million, well, use that to improve the services. Spend that rather than give it to shareholders. So there's something's gone wrong with the way the franchise is operating.
Southern is part of Govia Thameslink, which is just one arm of the Go-Ahead Group empire. They also own 2 other train companies in the UK, London Midland and South Eastern. But it's buses that are Go-Ahead's real golden goose, with 8 companies from Durham to Dorset and much of the country in between.
The buses that are actually the really profitable part of that business. The margins on buses, you're looking at about 12%, whereas on rail, you're only looking at just over 2%. So the idea that we could somehow cut fares if only these companies weren't making profit it just doesn't really hold water, I'm afraid.
Go-Ahead insists Govia Thameslink and Southern make no profit and are subsidised by their other businesses. Government insists the rail firm is striving to deliver a better service. Unions insist more strikes down the line.
Well, joining me now to discuss whether Theresa May's new government is undaunted by the prospect of taking on the unions is the Conservative MP Chris Philp, whose South Croydon constituents have been badly affected by that Southern Rail strike, and Labour frontbench MP Catherine West. I'm also joined by the newly elected co-leader of the Greens, Jonathan Bartley, in Birmingham. Chris Philp first. Let me put it to you that the government wants to smash the unions, break the unions, however you want to describe it, and they're siding with the bosses.
There is no desire at all to break the unions. Trade unions have a long and proud history of standing up for workers and representing them when they're getting oppressed. But what we've seen in the last few months from the RMT union on Southern is nothing like that. They have concocted a dispute about who opens and shuts the doors. There is no evidence there's any safety problem, there's no pay cut, no staff losses. They're inflicting misery on my constituents for no reason at all.
Well, is it when you look at the transport dispute and the health dispute, Jeremy Hunt basically has gone to war with the junior doctors. Chris Grayling, according to the unions, won't talk to them. It does very much look like the government's rather relishing the confrontation.
Look, there is no relish, but there is a desire to make sure basic services get provided. I mean, Jeremy Hunt compromised with the junior doctors last May. The BMA themselves accepted the compromise, and now, 3 months later, they're going on strike, which is ridiculous. And on the railways, as I said, every single job is being guaranteed. Nobody's pay is being cut. The proposals are safe, and yet the militant RMT are insisting on inflicting misery on my constituents and me.
Catherine West, many passengers are fed up with the RMT action. How much longer before they get fed up with the junior doctors too?
Well, I think
In the Southern case, the 20 million which the Secretary of State for Transport's just given to the company, which earned 100 million and whose chief executive is paid over 2 million each year, I think we just have to get the balance right, because that 20 million really should be paid to customers and to consumers, people who buy their tickets every day and who feel ripped off that they're not getting a good deal.
Straight to Chris Philp, that 20 million, you know, 100 million profits, the government, instead of taking the franchise away, hands out another 20 million.
Well, by the way, the £20 million is mostly going on track improvements, and those are dealt with by Network Rail. So it's not correct to say the money is being given to Southern Railway. It categorically is not. It's being spent on infrastructure improvements. But I do think it's wrong they're making a £100 million profit while residents in my neighbourhood are suffering. And I think
so they should give that back to
Well, I think that
passengers?
£100 million should be spent on investing in services, in addition to the 20 million. And I think GTR have done a very bad job running the franchise, but the RMT are to blame as well.
So, Catherine West, do you think the franchise should be taken away? Is that what a Labour government would do?
Well, I think when franchises come up, it should be looked at that possibly a public provider could provide that service as well, so that we can enhance the competition, because often what we find with the franchises is that there's only one company who will do it, whereas if we said that nationalisation is an option, then there would be an enhanced sense of competition so that we get a better deal.
Well, let me bring in Jonathan Bartley now. Whose side are you on? And do you side with Labour or the Tories here, the unions, the passengers, the patients? Where are you?
We're on the side of working people. You know, I'm a regular user of Southern Thameslink. I've just spent 4 weeks in hospital with my son, working with junior doctors. You know what? I trust the junior doctors to be the best judges of whether their environments are insecure or not. I trust the workers on the railways to know whether it's going to be detrimental to passengers. My son, you know, as a wheelchair user, is going to have a problem using railways when there aren't enough people to help him on and off the train. This is about real life. It's about real people's pay and wages. And what we've seen since 2007 has been a public sector pay freeze, or a very small incremental increase for public sector workers. Meanwhile, we've seen real wages right across the board. You know, a lot of people aren't union members, but those people who are union members and those who aren't, workers, real people that we're talking about, have lost track. They are struggling. A third of homeowners, you know, are risking losing their homes from just a month's paycheck away. This is an age of insecurity which we have to address.
So isn't it a failure of the left, including the Greens? You say you want a progressive alliance with Labour. Isn't it a failure of the left broadly that the government can basically be quite heavy-handed on this dispute?
No, there's only one group of people that have failed in this, and that's the government. And there's a whole larger group of people that are being failed, and that is ordinary working people. And there's been an assault over the last 30 years. And I think, yes, let's put our hands up. There has been a failure on the left to defend the unions, and we haven't appreciated actually how important the work of unions is. When you get wage growth, the economy prospers. The economy becomes stronger. We all prosper. But actually, let's not lose sight of the fact that there have been fewer strike days lost recently. In fact, we're at a record low in terms of days lost in terms of strikes. But wage growth has slowed. So we need to actually be focusing on what's important, getting that wage growth up. We all benefit from it. Real people will benefit from it. And it is the government that's failing, not working people.
Chris Philp, does the government now need to cool it on both hospitals and the rail network? Or are they going to up the ante?
Well, I think the government should make sure the reforms that are needed are implemented. In the case of the trains, it'll make the train operation actually safer and more efficient. No one's going to lose their job, so the people that were opening and closing the doors can help Jonathan's son. And in the case of the health service, a 7-day NHS is safer. But on
so
that,
they're going to fight this to the end, you think?
Look, I think they should stick to their guns, because what they're doing is in the interests of patients and passengers, and they should not give in to militant unions. But on that wage point Jonathan just made, you know, wages are now growing at over 2%, inflation is zero, and the government just a few weeks ago, in April of this year, introduced an 11% year-on-year increase in the minimum wage. So this is a government that has stood up for ordinary working people on low incomes, and I'm proud to have voted for the biggest ever minimum wage increase as a Conservative.
Well, I think it's interesting that we're thinking about what the government's done. The government has allowed the prices of trains and train journeys to increase exponentially. The price of going to work by train has gone up by about 25% since 2010. And these days, with wages flat, 25% increase, as well as your childcare going up, as well as now the prices going up because of Brexit in the shops. You know, when is this going to stop?
Well, let me put that to Jonathan Bartley, because you and Catherine West are sounding remarkably similar. Why don't you just join the Corbynistas?
Well, we're thrilled that Labour is moving in our direction. We're very flattered that they're taking on some of our policies, and we are open to working with them. But, you know, we are distinct, and we're also united.
Well, are you, though? Because haven't Labour just seized all your policies, really?
Well, you know, I wish they would seize our policy on electoral reform. There are plenty of places where we aren't in agreement. But, you know, no one has a monopoly on wisdom. We're willing to work with anyone who shares the values, who's on the side of working people. You know, we're not precious about this, but we need to see a united Labour Party, and we need to see them working with other parties. We need to move past the tribalism. And I think when parties do recognise that, when they're prepared to put perhaps their narrow tribal interests aside, then we will see a better future for Britain, a better future for the left in Britain. We're open to that. You know, let's see Labour come forward and do it.
You helped get John Major elected. It's a long journey you've taken from the Tories.
It's a very long journey. Yeah, 1995. I
Probably
just
on
finished...
Southern Rail.
I just left the London School of Economics, and I was working in Parliament on a cross-party basis. I've never been tribal myself. I did work for Major. It was a good experience, but you know what? I am so far away from where the Tories are now and where they were then. And actually, it was having contact with people, ordinary working people, and those within the disabled movement. 10 million disabled people in this country who don't get a voice, who are trying to use the trains that aren't accessible, who are going to be hit by the fact that there won't be more staff on Southern Rail. These are the people who really matter. These are the people that I am standing with, and that's why I'm a member of the Green Party.
Catherine West, would you welcome Jonathan Bartley back? Sounds a bit like a Corbynista to me.
Well, I think Jonathan could join Labour. He's been in the Tory party, the Green Party. He could join Labour. But I think what's important is the group that I've been working in Parliament on Europe post the 23rd of June. We've got support from the only Green parliamentarian. We've got support from Plaid Cymru. We've got support from... We've invited Tory members. We're hoping that they'll come along when we have our meeting next. And I think it's really important that in Parliament we work together very closely to try and get the best approach next and, you know, make sure that we work together on the things which really do matter.
Catherine West, Chris Philp and Jonathan Bartley, thank you very much for joining me. Now, Melania Trump is suing the Daily Mail and a US blogger for $150 million over allegations she worked as an escort in the 1990s. The Daily Mail suggested Mrs. Trump not only worked as a model in New York and met husband Donald earlier than previously reported, but her lawyers said the claims were outright lying and egregious, malicious and harmful to Mrs. Trump. The Daily Mail and blogger Webster Tarpley have since retracted the articles. In a moment, we'll be hearing from Webster, but first, our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, reports.
The media, the worst people ever. The worst. I hate some of these people, but I'd never kill them. I hate them.
So we know he hates the press. Now he's suing them, and it's personal. It's the wife. It's Melania. Remember this. Her convention speech widely criticised as being not her speech in significant parts.
My husband is ready to lead this great nation.
That put her centre stage. Further allegations followed, vehemently denied that she'd worked illegally as a model in the US. Explosive, if true, given Trump's views on Mexicans coming to work in the country without papers. On August the 4th, Melania Trump had had enough and fought back on Twitter, saying, "I have at all times been in full compliance with the laws of this country." So things were simmering, and then the lid blew off, and it blew off right here near the seat of power in the United States. Team Trump suing Britain's Daily Mail and Mail Online in a court in a suburb of Washington, D.C. for more than $150 million after the paper suggested Melania Trump had worked as an escort in her modelling days. The case is being launched in a Washington suburb because Trump is also suing a local blogger from there, Webster Tarpley. In a statement, Trump's lawyer Charles Harder said,
"These defendants made several statements about Mrs. Trump that are 100% false and tremendously damaging to her personal and professional reputation. They broadcast their lies to millions of people throughout the US and the world without any justification."
Astonishingly, in the UK, the Mail and Mail Online instantly collapsed, taking down the story, offering profuse retractions online and on paper.
We did not intend to state or suggest that these allegations are true, nor did we intend to state or suggest that Mrs. Trump ever worked as an escort or in the sex business.
There's no way a case like this could get off the ground in the UK
based on our defamation law, a law that the Daily Mail always complains about, but which is now pretty good. And secondly, of course, there's no question of damages anything like 150 million, and the maximum damages in this country are about $250,000 for something really egregious.
Tonight, at least one man who sued the tabloids for telling lies about his personal life and won says Team Trump might just win in the US.
Well, I think it's going to be very interesting because if you want to win a case like that in America, you have to prove what they call malice, which means that the people who published it knew it wasn't true or were completely careless as to whether it's true. That, I think, they'd have a very good chance with because the Daily Mail has got endless form.
Legal opinion would counsel, however, that malice is a tough thing to prove before an American jury. Recently, a lawyer in the US sued a website and won $140 million for his client, Hulk Hogan, the wrestler. So it can be done. And yes, that same lawyer is now Trump's man, coming for the Mail and the Mail Online. As the wife herself puts it.
When you attack him, he will punch back 10 times harder.
Well, earlier I spoke to Webster Tarpley via the internet from Maryland. He's the blogger being sued by Melania Trump. I put to him that he couldn't put just any old tittle-tattle out there, which her lawyers describe as allegations so egregious, malicious and harmful, they think there should be damages of $150 million.
I hope you ask the London Daily Mail the same questions because they essentially put out something quite similar.
Well, I would if I could get them in the studio, but they also say we didn't intend to state or suggest that these allegations are true. So why then were they published in the first place by yourself?
Well, you're going to have to ask them about that. But here's the problem. The first family in the United States must be above reproach. And this means that if there are unclarified issues or other matters in the personal histories of people in the first family, this is a very great danger to the form of government because foreign intelligence agencies, right? You can go through the list of countries that might do this. Foreign intelligence agencies would be able then to use these unclarified issues as a means of blackmailing the United States government. And this is what I proceeded from. This was my principal fear.
Are you worried about this lawsuit? How will you fund the legal fees?
I am worried about the fate of the United States. I am worried about the First Amendment. I am worried about the chilling of public debate, the suppression of inquiry into public figures in all forms who simply have billions of dollars and therefore can try to silence in independent journalistic voices. And I think that is very dangerous for the country.
Why do you think that you, a local blogger, have been sued alongside a big British newspaper, The Mail? Why have they picked on you?
Well, first of all, it is ironically an honor to be chosen to defend the First Amendment. I guess I'm the only American on the receiving end of this legal proceeding.
Webster Tarpley, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
So in a week when Donald Trump also told a cheering crowd in Arizona that Mexico would pay for a border wall between the two countries, how have these very different headlines played into the campaign? I'm joined now by the Conservative political commentator and Trump supporter, Ann Coulter in New York. Ann Coulter, what impact first do you think this legal action from Melania Trump will have in the campaign?
None at all. In fact, I hadn't heard anything. I think I had heard something about it, but that's the only interview I've heard on it. I don't think anyone believes it, and I don't think anyone cares. We're not electing Melania. And if you want to compare first families, Bill Clinton was quite credibly and thoroughly investigated by ABC News, for example, for raping Juanita Broaddrick and massively molesting lots of women. We have Hillary's top aide, Huma Abedin, connected to and for many years an editor of a Sharia publication pushing the Saudi government's line.
Hang on, you're throwing out allegations now in the same way that the Trump campaign has criticised the allegations being thrown at Melania Trump. So let me ask you this. Was Melania Trump right to sue, do you think? Because it's drawn a whole lot of attention to the story over here, even if not over there, as you say.
Yes, I think when you're slandered, you should sue. This is why Peter Thiel is a hero in this country for shutting down Gawker, for putting up that secretly videoed tape of Hulk Hogan having sex. I mean, that's not news.
Well,
that is just terrorism.
He might be a hero
the idea
to
this
you,
is some sort of First Amendment right to lie about someone and slander someone, and I'm not throwing out unsubstantiated allegations. Juanita Broderick said she was raped by Bill Clinton. ABC News is hardly a right-wing outlet. They investigated for a full year, and the charges were extremely credible. You can review the tape on that. It's also a fact that Huma Abedin is on this Saudi publication.
Okay, look, you're talking about all sorts of allegations, some of which have not been substantiated.
They're
so
not
let's move on to let's move on to what let's deal with the words.
Allegation.
Okay, you support Donald Trump. Let's deal with some of the words he's put out this week in the campaign on immigration, for example. Now, he was supposedly toning down the rhetoric on immigration. He hasn't. Why not?
I think the softening, he's done this before. He's a very smart and strategic thinker. The alleged softening tricked every cable news station into covering his absolutely magnificent speech live, something they've never done before. Toward the end of the speech, he brought on what are called the angel moms, and that is mostly mothers, some fathers of children who have been murdered quite horribly by illegal aliens who shouldn't have been in this country. Every other time he's done that, and I've been at a lot of his speeches, I've spoken at a lot of his speeches, every time he has brought the angel moms, parents of children killed by illegals, every time he brings them on stage, the networks cut away.
Right,
well, this time they didn't, because they were waiting to see if there would be any of this alleged softening.
Sure, but if it was a triumphant speech, as you put it, why is it that members of the Hispanic Advisory Council that Mr. Trump set up only 2 weeks ago have been walking out as a result?
Of all the groups divided by ethnicity in America, the one that cares the least about this election, that I think the least rides on it, are Hispanic Americans. That is quite different for the leaders of these grievance groups. The more Hispanics there are, the more popular they are, the more desirable they are for media, the more money they get. It's purely self-interest, as it is for campaign consultants and pollsters and the Washington insiders. Trump has shown they're utterly unnecessary. They don't know what they're doing. But the Hispanic leaders, that's very different from Hispanic voters. They want just a never-ending supply of Hispanics to increase their own power, media visibility, and money.
I'd love to go on, but Ann Coulter, thanks very much for joining us. The electronics company Samsung is recalling its just-released flagship smartphone after battery problems apparently caused dozens of the devices to catch fire during or after charging. Some of those affected have posted footage online. 2.5 million Galaxy Note 7 devices have been bought since its launch 2 weeks ago. Sales have now been halted. Samsung said customers would be able to swap or replace them with new devices. An explosion at a market in the home city of the Philippine president, Rodrigo Duterte, has killed at least 10 people. Dozens more were wounded in the incident in a street market outside the Marco Polo Hotel in Davao. The president's son, who is the vice mayor of the city, said his father was safe and was taken to a police station after the explosion. Now, after 27 years in power, the president of Uzbekistan, Islam Karimov, has died. Uzbek state TV confirmed the news after days of rumours and speculation. Karimov was known as a tyrant with a penchant for cruelty who successfully crushed all opposition in the Central Asian country. His death has sparked concern for the future of one of the world's most repressed nations. Our Asia correspondent Jonathan Miller reports.
It took 6 days for state TV to announce that President Islam Karimov had had a cerebral hemorrhage. And his condition was critical. Most Uzbeks knew days ago, after his youngest daughter posted the news on social media, and rumours began swirling around Central Asia's most populous country that their iron-fisted tyrant was dead. Yesterday's Independence Day celebrations were muted as 30 million Uzbeks, who've only ever known one leader, pondered what would come next. Many fear chaos as the lid is lifted on nearly 3 decades of Karimov's repressive rule, although nobody voiced that. Our leader has done a lot for our country and for us, and we wish him a quick recovery, this lady said. God let him be healthy forever. We heard he was ill, she said. We wish him a long life. It was not to be. Although at 78, Islam Karimov had had a good autocrat's innings. He lived in the bubble of a small family clique surrounded by security apparatchiks, and it's not clear whether he realized that he was not wildly popular. He crushed independent thinking like he mercilessly crushed all dissent. But Islam Karimov did like a dance. His critics were silenced or exiled or tortured or jailed. So he kept on winning elections last year with 90% of the vote. Vladimir Putin wanted to assert Kremlin influence in post-Soviet Uzbekistan, but Islam Karimov was wily, choosing to cherry-pick what he wanted from Russia, courting China for money and remaining wary of Western intentions after one too many Western-backed colour revolutions elsewhere. Karimov liked to keep things stable. When he felt stability threatened, Islam Karimov moved hard and fast, his forces massacring 1,000 protesters in the eastern city of Andijan in 2005. 12,000 political prisoners pack Uzbek jails, where torture is endemic, with reports of prisoners even being boiled alive. Karimov's eldest daughter, Gulnara, a would-be pop princess and extravagant international socialite, was once groomed to be his successor. But when she was charged with corruption, she likened her father to Stalin and has not been seen since. And so Dad bequeaths a succession crisis. Most likely contenders the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, and the man who's headed Uzbek intelligence for 21 years. People are apprehensive.
Everyone looks at Syria and Iraq and at countries where change made things worse. People are afraid. This is what happens where presidents hold absolute power.
Thousands of Uzbek jihadists are fighting in Syria. Their battalions played a key role in breaking the siege of Aleppo. If post-Karimov Uzbekistan crumbles, these hardened fighters will be keen to capitalize on any chaos back home. The jihadist threat cast a long shadow over the tomb being prepared today for the dead despot. And with Uzbek clans vying for power and purges now probable, Islam Karimov bequeaths a volatile legacy.
After the break, join us here at Stoke Mandeville, where the Paralympic movement began after the Second World War. We'll be covering the special ceremony to light the Paralympic heritage flame at the start of its journey to Rio. Welcome to Stoke Mandeville, a very special place for the Paralympic movement because it was here in 1948 that a small group of disabled servicemen and women competed in a sporting competition that became the forerunner to the Paralympics. They were being treated by Dr. Ludwig Guttmann, a German specialist who made sport a vital part of rehabilitation. And tonight, that history will be recognised in a special ceremony to light the Paralympic heritage flame. It features disabled and non-disabled dancers, together with some of our most famous Paralympic heroes, including Dame Tanni Grey-Thompson and Kelly Gallagher. That flame will go to Brazil, where it will merge with torches being carried there to create a new Paralympic flame. And that will light the cauldron in the Olympic Stadium and open the Games on Wednesday night. With me tonight through the ceremony, Tim Hollingsworth, from the British Paralympic Association to talk us through the significance of what's happening here. And we'll also be talking to Paralympians Helene Rainsford and Ben Sneesby, as well as the actress and campaigner Samantha Renke, about what legacy we can hope for from Rio. Now, the idea behind the ceremony tonight, called the Seeds of Diversity, is the story of those first games in 1948 and how they sowed the seeds of the Paralympic movement around the world. So, Tim, this is a relatively new thing, isn't it? The Paralympic flame, or the heritage flame tonight, has kind of been invented in the last couple of years.
Well, 4 years, because it was 4 years ago at the start of London 2012 when the flame was lit here and then run through the night to go into the opening ceremony of London 2012. And after that, the International Paralympic Committee, and indeed ourselves and the good people here in Buckinghamshire, realised that we had something special here. So yes, the heritage flame is now an integral part of every Paralympic flame celebration, summer and winter. So we were here 2 years ago for Sochi, and we're here again tonight for Rio 2016.
Now, we're 5 days away from the Games beginning, and the last couple of weeks have been blighted by lots of concerns about what's going on in Rio.
Yeah.
Now, tonight, the IPC, the organising committee of the Rio Games, not the IPC, are saying, well, things are looking up. They're saying they've sold more than half the tickets, 1.3 million out of 2.5 million tickets. So there aren't going to be empty stadiums after all. Are you reassured?
I am getting reassured, absolutely. It's feeling very positive from our point of view, because partly we've got athletes on the ground now. They're in the village, they're getting ready, and they're very excited about the competition to come.
And everything's working, is it? It's all been adapted, they're not complaining about
It's a challenging city, and right now it's quite a challenging nation to be in as well. But those challenges are there to be overcome, and we are doing. And actually the organising committee are pulling every stop out to make sure the Paralympic Games is a success. Like you say, the ticket sales, while still I want to see better still, are so much better than they were a month ago. I think the momentum is there for this to be a fantastic Games.
Now, Gutmann, the man being recognised, the man who started it all, was a remarkable man, left Germany because of what was happening there. And you know, it can be very interesting to see how they pay tribute to him tonight.
Yeah, the whole theme of tonight, as I understand it, is to go right back to that route in 1948 of the Games that we cherish now, being the birthplace of the movement. And he was a remarkable man, you're right. He fled the Nazis in the late 30s, came over, was brought to the hospital here in Stoke Mandeville to work on the rehabilitation of servicemen and women who fundamentally had been given up on. And he decided that that was the opposite of what should happen, that sport could be a fundamental part of that. Saw in 1948 the London Olympic Games that was hosted after the war, and thought that's the thing we can do too. And from that very small beginning, 16 athletes on a field doing archery competition, we're looking at 5,000 athletes from 170 countries or whatever it is in Rio on Wednesday.
Let me bring in Helene, because, I mean, having been a Paralympian yourself, you're now involved very much in the legacy of the Paralympics around the world. This is a movement that has come a long way in a relatively small period of time. I mean, the first proper games were only 1960.
Absolutely. I think if you look at both the development of the sports setup, both domestic kind of recreational sport and through to elite competition, the development of that has been huge. But I think although it's a really important element that elite sport, Paralympic sport and all those fantastic inspiration athletes you'll see out there, the real legacy element is, what does that do for other people around the world who have disabilities? Does it give them something to aspire to, the values to take into their own lives, to realise if they've been told you have a disability, you can't do something, actually you can go on and achieve. And whether that be sport, whether that be a hobby, whether that be a role within your local community, it's really about the sort of holistic community view of people with disabilities who can go on and achieve, and it's diversity rather than an inability to do something.
And do you think Brazil has risen to the occasion so far?
I think
under very difficult circumstances politically.
I think you have to... Sorry. I think you have to look at that. London is very different Great Britain is very different as a country in its progression compared to Brazil and all the challenges they have in Rio. And
it's actually beginning now. So let's begin and see the seeds of diversity. And what we see now is Ward X, the very first ward here at Stoke Mandeville, which was treating injured soldiers with spinal injuries.
Ward X. 1944. A makeshift hut. 26 beds. With bodies crushed. But there's a seed. A seed of hope. Of possibility. An idea. That there is always something you can do. Difference and diversity is the key.
The dancers Laura DeJow and Chris Pavia. Laura being the first disabled dancer to appear on the stage at Sadler's Wells.
At first, a competition. War-injured men, waking in their beds. Race for the prize. Get up, get dressed, get into wheelchairs. Then onwards, onwards.
And what we see here is how Gutmann was using sport in those very early days in a very pioneering way to rehabilitate servicemen who'd come back from war, leading them into the first competition. And that competition, Tim Hollingsworth, was archery.
It was. It's the original sport of the Paralympic movement. 16 of them, all British in this case, and then very soon afterwards some Dutch wounded servicemen as well joined them, I believe. And we found it was a very humble beginning, as we say.
And always moving, never still. Spirit in motion, bows drawn taut, eyes focused, arms stretched back. The tension.
And the sway poles, you will remember from London 2012, a really integral part of the opening ceremony. And these two performers are actually going to Rio, Milton Lopez and Amelia Cavallo, and they will be performing a show alongside the Olympic Games. Tim, Spirit in Motion, which the narration said, is the motto.
It is, of the International Paralympic Committee, Spirit in Motion. And I think the whole sense also, the Agitos, our symbol is the Latin for I move. Really, it's all about getting that sense of movement into the picture.
Then release, swift and sure. 16 men and women connecting to their target.
And that's the 16 men and women referred to as the 16 archers in those first games. I mean, he added sports as he went along.
He did, and indeed, post that instance, gradually more impairment groups were added, and other athletes came into the games. Most of the original sport was wheelchair-based. It was spinal injury-based. We've obviously progressed well beyond that now into the games we'll see next week.
And were many countries involved in those early years?
No, originally it was very much based around the UK and Europe, but it started to grow quite quickly. And Rome in 1960 was the first official Paralympic Games. The one after that was Tokyo in '64, and of course we're back there in 2020. First time a host nation has hosted twice. And
what we see now is the seeds of diversity coming out. Now this is the idea that from this seed here at Stoke Mandeville, and there we see Ludwig Gutmann's packet of seeds, these seeds were spread out around the world and planted as a movement that has grown into what we will see is a Paralympic garden.
And so it starts. Seeds take root. They germinate, grow, flower and flourish. The seeds of diversity spread throughout the world.
and some of our Paralympic heroes, Ellie Simmons and Hannah Cockcroft, recognised in these designed seed packets that spread around the world. And Ellie still wants to watch.
Yep, she arrived in the village last night. She's entered into the same event she won and competed in London. But there are many athletes now. That's one of the great joys for us. Of our 264 in Rio, we've got many medal hopefuls and hopefully many household names to come.
Do you think there will be new poster stars?
I do hope so, because we're so competitive across so many sports. The ability we've got, at least, for new names to come to the fore, very much as they did for Team GB during the Olympics, and actually it not being just the old names, but hopefully some of the old names still winning.
Now, if you're wondering about the dog is Griffin, and he belongs to Claire Sibberton. He's a Labrador Retriever mix, and Claire Sibberton describes him as her lifeline. He does an extraordinary amount of things for her. It's worth saying that Claire also took part in the 2012 ceremony, which was designed by the same designer tonight, the director Bradley Hemmings, who was the co-director of the London 2012 opening ceremony. But this is the first time we've seen a dog on the stage. Keep your eye on what was Ward X and what is now that amazing glass lighthouse, because somewhere within that is the Heritage Flame.
But that first inspiration, that shining seed, remains here at Ward X, setting spirits in motion and forever burning bright.
And there is the flame in a seed pod brought out by Kelly Gallagher, one of Britain's stars of the Winter Games.
Yep, our first ever Paralympic gold medalist back in Sochi 2 years ago. Yeah, so her name forever in the record books as our first ever winter gold medalist. Downhill skier.
But that flame needs to be taken onto a torch, and one of our great stars is appearing for that. Dame Tammy Gray-Thompson appears, and the crowd are applauding. $11 medals.
Something like that. Lots.
And there she salutes Ludwig Gutmann, the founder of the Games.
His daughter's in the audience tonight, Ava Luftler.
And so, perhaps Britain's greatest Paralympian, I think 11 gold medals, 16 Paralympic medals in all, takes that Paralympic heritage flame, this new innovation for the Games, and that Games will go from here and be, well, taken virtually, they say, perhaps over social media, to Brazil, where it will meet up with 5 other flames that are in the 5 regions of Brazil that are being carried around in a traditional torch-carrying ceremony, and they will form together a new Paralympic flame which will be brought in to the Rio Stadium next Wednesday night. And that is the ceremony. Well, let me bring in 2 more of my guests who have been with me watching that. Ben Sneesby, the skier who competed at Sochi, and also Samantha Renke, who's an actress and disability campaigner. Ben, how important is this to you?
Yeah, it's hugely important. You know, I'd just like to say, being here and seeing that, it's made me so proud to, 1, be a Paralympian, and 2, be British. You know, the birthplace of the Paralympics here, and what a fantastic movement. You know, how many barriers has the Paralympic movement broken down, you know, regarding disability. So yeah, hugely proud to be here, and this is a really special event.
Samantha Renke, I mean, what tends to happen, I suppose now, is that we all get very swept up with this movement, and we perhaps make bigger claims for what it might achieve than is possible.
Of course. I mean, 50% of the British public have never met anybody with a disability, and these games expose disabled people to the British public. But it only happens every 4 years. We need to see disabled people every day on our TV, within our media, so that this awkwardness around disability changes. So I think this is an amazing start, but we need to get things better.
I mean, do you feel things have improved at all since 2012?
Most definitely.
In terms of attitudes?
Yeah, and 60% of disabled people feel like the Paralympics does make awareness, you know, increase awareness of disability. But we just simply need more.
Helene, what's your view on this? Because, I mean, it's your job now to try and push this legacy.
I think that the Games do a huge step for what people can achieve with they have a disability. I think it really challenges people's stigma and view of what disability is. But I agree, yeah, we do need to see more opportunities for people with disabilities to get involved in showcasing what they can do in a whole variety of different backgrounds, be that television, be that any different type of environment. And I think the real magic of the Paralympics is that it gives people something to go, wow, we can go on and achieve, and it gives that kind of magic of actually people with disabilities can aspire to whatever they wish to aspire to.
Last word, Tim. Starts next week. You're looking hopeful?
Yeah, and I should say the whole thing starts for us with the sport. I mean, I've got a gold medalist to my left and a Paralympian a bit further along. And it's what that sport can show and do. And we hope next week that we'll have many more examples of incredible sporting endeavour leading to a wider conversation.
Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I wish we could talk longer, but we will, I'm sure, through the Games. That is it from Stoke Mandeville, from this remarkable ceremony tonight, from all of us on the programme. That's Channel 4 News. Have a very good evening.